Maria Rodriguez had always been the type of person who couldn't walk past someone in need. At 28 years old, she worked as a night shift nurse at Chicago General Hospital, and her instinct to help people had gotten her into trouble more times than she could count. But nothing could have prepared her for what would happen on that cold Tuesday night in March. She was walking home from her shift at 3 a.m. when she heard the sound of screeching tires and a loud crash coming from the alley behind Miller's electronics store. Without thinking twice, Maria ran toward the noise, her medical training kicking in automatically. The scene that greeted her was chaos. A black sedan had crashed into a brick wall, steam rising from the crumpled hood. The driver's side door hung open, and she could see a man slumped over the steering wheel. Blood was streaming down his face from a deep cut on his forehead. Maria quickly checked his pulse and breathing. He was alive but unconscious, and she could smell alcohol on his breath. She assumed he was just another drunk driver who had lost control of his vehicle. Without hesitation, she called 911 and then began applying pressure to his head wound with her scarf. As she waited for the ambulance, Maria noticed something odd about the man's appearance. Despite the accident, his clothes were expensive looking. His watch was a Rolex and his shoes were Italian leather. But she pushed these observations aside, focusing on keeping him stable until help arrived. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes, and Maria rode along to the hospital, continuing to monitor the man's vital signs. She learned from the paramedics that his name was David Chen, and according to his wallet, he was 32 years old with an address in the wealthy Lincoln Park neighborhood. At the hospital, Maria stayed with David until the doctors took over. He had a concussion, a broken rib, and needed stitches, but he would recover fully. As she was about to leave, he regained consciousness and grabbed her hand weakly. "Thank you," he whispered, his eyes filled with genuine gratitude. "You saved my life." Maria smiled and squeezed his hand gently. "Just rest now. You're going to be fine." What Maria didn't know was that David Chen was not the innocent accident victim she believed him to be. He was actually a low-level informant for the FBI, feeding information about illegal activities in Chinatown. The crash hadn't been an accident at all. Someone had been following him, and in his panic to escape, he had lost control of his car. Even more dangerous was the fact that David had been carrying a USB drive containing sensitive information about money laundering operations connected to one of the most powerful crime families in the city. In the chaos of the accident and rescue, the drive had fallen out of his jacket pocket and was now lying somewhere in that dark alley. As Maria finally made her way home that morning, she felt good about helping someone in need. She had no idea that her act of kindness had just put her directly in the crosshairs of people who killed without hesitation. The crime family that David had been investigating had already discovered that their operations had been compromised, and they were systematically hunting down anyone connected to the leak. David's handler at the FBI, Agent Sarah Martinez, had been trying to reach him all night. When she learned about the accident from the hospital records, she realized that the situation was far worse than a simple car crash. David's cover had been blown, and now an innocent nurse had become an unwitting part of a deadly game. Meanwhile, in a luxury penthouse across the city, Vincent the Wolf Marconi was receiving updates about the night's events. Vincent was the son of the crime family's boss, and he was known for his ruthless efficiency in handling problems. When he learned that David had been rescued by a hospital worker, his cold gray eyes narrowed with calculation. "Find out everything about this nurse," he ordered his lieutenant. "I want to know where she lives, where she works, who her family is, everything. If she saw something she shouldn't have, we need to know about it." As the sun rose over Chicago, Maria was settling into her small apartment, completely unaware that her phone number, address, and work schedule were already being gathered by some of the most dangerous people in the city. Her simple act of compassion was about to turn her quiet life upside down in ways she could never have imagined. 3 days after the accident, Maria noticed that something felt different in her daily routine. She couldn't put her finger on it at first, but there was an unsettling feeling that she was being watched. When she walked to work, she caught glimpses of the same dark car parked in different locations along her route. When she went grocery shopping, she noticed a man in a baseball cap who seemed to be following her through the aisles. At the hospital, Maria tried to check on David Chen, but she was told he had been discharged earlier than expected. This struck her as odd because his injuries had seemed serious enough to require at least a week of observation. When she asked the head nurse about it, She was told that his family had requested a transfer to a private medical facility. What Maria didn't know was that Agent Martinez had moved David to a safe house after learning that Vincent, Marconi's people, were asking questions about him. David was now under federal protection, but the damage had already been done. The crime family knew he was the informant, and they were determined to find out what information he had passed along and to whom. That evening, as Maria was leaving the hospital after her shift, she decided to take a different route home to test her suspicions about being followed. Sure enough, the dark sedan that had been parked near the hospital entrance began following her at a distance. Her heart started racing as she realized that whatever was happening was very real and very dangerous. Maria quickly ducked into an all-night diner and called her brother Carlos, who was a police officer with the Chicago PD. She explained her concerns about being followed, but Carlos thought she was being paranoid. "Maria, you work nights in a rough part of the city," he said. "You're probably just noticing things that were always there. Maybe take a few days off and get some rest." But Maria knew this wasn't her imagination. As she sat in the diner, she saw two men enter and take a table near the window. They weren't eating or drinking anything, just watching her. She decided to stay in the public place until morning and then figure out what to do next. Meanwhile, Vincent Marconi was growing impatient with his surveillance team. They had been watching Maria for 3 days and had found no evidence that she knew anything about David's real identity or activities. But Vincent was not the type of man who left loose ends untied. "Maybe she doesn't know anything," suggested Tony Russo, one of Vincent's most trusted men. "She's just a nurse who helped an accident victim." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Maybe. But David Chen cost us millions of dollars when he gave the FBI information about our Seattle operation. I want to know for certain that this woman can't hurt us." He paused, staring out the window of his penthouse at the city lights below. "Bring her in. We'll ask her some questions. If she's innocent, we let her go. If not..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The next morning, Maria made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going home to her apartment, she went to the alley where she had found David. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important about that night. As she searched the area, her foot kicked something small and hard. Looking down, she saw a black USB drive partially hidden under some debris. Maria picked up the drive, turning it over in her hands. It looked new and expensive, definitely not something that belonged in a dirty alley. She remembered how well-dressed David had been, and wondered if it might have fallen from his car during the accident. Her nursing training had taught her to be thorough and observant, and every instinct told her this was important. At that moment, a black SUV pulled up at the mouth of the alley. Two large men in dark suits got out and began walking toward her with purpose. Maria's blood ran cold as she realized these weren't police officers or hospital administrators. These men had the look of people who were used to getting what they wanted through intimidation and force. "Ms. Rodriguez," one of them called out in a voice that was deceptively polite. "We'd like to have a word with you." Maria clutched the USB drive tightly in her fist and looked around desperately for an escape route. The alley was a dead end, with high brick walls on both sides. The only way out was past the two men who were now blocking her path. "I think there's been a mistake," Maria said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just a nurse. I don't know what you want from me." The taller man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We know exactly who you are, Ms. Rodriguez. You helped someone a few nights ago. Someone who caused problems for our employer. We just want to make sure you didn't see or hear anything you shouldn't have." As the men stepped closer, Maria made a desperate decision. She quickly slipped the USB drive into her shoe and then put her hands up in surrender. "Okay," she said. "I'll come with you. But I don't know anything about anything. I just helped an injured man." But even as she spoke these words, Maria realized that her life had just taken a turn into a world she never knew existed. The USB drive hidden in her shoe felt like it was burning against her skin, and she had a terrible feeling that whatever was on it was worth killing for. The two men escorted Maria to their black SUV with a politeness that felt more threatening than outright aggression. They didn't hurt her or even touch her roughly, but she could feel the potential for violence radiating from them like heat from a fire. The taller one, who seemed to be in charge, introduced himself simply as Mr. Romano and assured her that they just wanted to have a conversation. During the 20-minute drive through Chicago's streets, Maria tried to memorize every turn and landmark, hoping it might help her later. The USB drive in her shoe felt enormous, and she was terrified that they would somehow discover it. She kept thinking about David Chen and wondering what kind of trouble he had really been in. They arrived at what looked like an ordinary office building in the business district, but Maria noticed that all the windows were tinted dark, and there were security cameras at every entrance. Mr. Romano led her through a series of hallways to an elevator that required a key card to operate. They went up to the 15th floor, where she was taken to a comfortable conference room with leather chairs and expensive artwork on the walls. "Please, sit down," Mr. Romano said, gesturing to a chair across from a polished mahogany table. "Someone will be with you shortly." Maria was left alone for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. The room had no windows and she couldn't tell what time it was or even what direction she was facing. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic far below. Finally, the door opened and a man in his early 30s walked in. He was impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, with dark hair slicked back and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see everything. Despite his youth, he carried himself with the kind of authority that made it clear he was used to being in control. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I'm Vincent Marconi. I apologize for the dramatic way we brought you here, but we needed to have this conversation in private." Maria had never heard the name Marconi, but something about the way he said it made her understand that it carried weight in certain circles. Vincent spoke quietly, almost gently, but there was steel underneath his words. "I understand you helped a man named David Chen a few nights ago," Vincent continued. "That was very kind of you. David was involved in some business dealings with my family, and we're trying to understand exactly what happened that night." Maria decided that honesty was her best strategy, at least partially. "I found him after his car crashed. He was bleeding and unconscious, so I called an ambulance and tried to keep him stable until help arrived. That's all." Vincent studied her face carefully. "Did he say anything to you? Before the ambulance came or at the hospital?" "He thanked me when he woke up at the hospital. That was it. I left right after that." Maria met his gaze steadily, hoping her fear didn't show. "Did you notice anything unusual at the scene of the accident? Anything that might have fallen from his car that seemed out of place?" This was the moment Maria had been dreading. The USB drive felt like it was screaming its presence from inside her shoe. "No, nothing. It was dark and I was focused on helping him. I wasn't looking around for anything else." Vincent leaned back in his chair and for a long moment he said nothing. Maria could hear her own heartbeat in the silence. Finally he smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made her more nervous, not less. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm going to be very direct with you. David Chen was stealing from my family. He took something that belongs to us and we need to get it back. If you know anything about this, anything at all, now would be a very good time to tell me." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, even though his tone remained conversational. Maria realized that these people were capable of things she didn't even want to imagine, but she also understood that admitting to having the USB drive would probably be signing her death warrant. "I swear to you, I don't know anything about any theft. I'm just a nurse who tried to help someone. I've never been involved in anything like this." Vincent stood up and walked to the door. "I believe you, Ms. Rodriguez. You seem like a good person who was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Relief flooded through Maria until Vincent turned back to face her. "However," he continued, "my father doesn't share my charitable view of coincidences. He's old school, and he believes in being absolutely certain about these things. So while I'm convinced of your innocence, he's going to want to verify it personally." Maria felt the blood drain from her face. "What does that mean?" "It means you're going to be our guest for a little while longer. Just until we can sort this whole situation out with David Chen. Don't worry, you'll be comfortable. And no one will hurt you as long as you continue to be truthful with us." As Vincent left the room, Maria heard the distinctive sound of a lock engaging. She was now officially a prisoner, and she had no idea how she was going to get out of this situation alive. The USB drive in her shoe suddenly felt like the heaviest thing in the world, and she began to understand that whatever information it contained was important enough for people to kill for. Outside in the hallway, Vincent was already making phone calls. His father, Don Salvatore Marconi, would arrive the next morning to personally question the nurse. Vincent had tried to convince him it wasn't necessary, but the old man insisted on handling this matter himself. And when Don Marconi questioned someone personally, they rarely walked away from the experience. Maria spent the night in what could only be described as a luxurious prison cell. She had been moved to a small but well-appointed apartment within the building, complete with a comfortable bed, a kitchenette, and even fresh clothes in her size. The door was locked from the outside, and she could hear guards talking quietly in the hallway. Despite the comfortable surroundings, she barely slept, and when she did manage to doze off, her dreams were filled with images of car crashes and dark figures chasing her through endless corridors. Early the next morning, she was awakened by the sound of multiple vehicles arriving in the street below. Through the small window in her room, Maria could see a convoy of 5 black SUVs pulling up to the building in perfect formation. Men in expensive suits emerged from the vehicles, moving with military precision as they secured the area around the building. From the lead SUV stepped an elderly man who commanded immediate respect from everyone around him. Even from 15 floors up, Maria could see that this was someone important. Don Salvatore Marconi was 73 years old, but he moved with the confident stride of a man half his age. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his dark suit was tailored to perfection. Everything about him spoke of power and authority built over decades of commanding absolute loyalty and fear. An hour later, Maria was escorted back to the conference room where she had met Vincent. This time, the atmosphere felt completely different. Where Vincent had been politely threatening, the presence of his father filled the room with a sense of genuine danger. Don Marconi sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 bodyguards who looked like they could break a person in half without breaking a sweat. "Sit," the old man commanded in accented English, gesturing to the same chair Maria had occupied the day before. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never been disobeyed in his life. Vincent stood behind his father's chair, looking noticeably more tense than he had during their previous meeting. It was clear that even he was careful around the family patriarch. "My son tells me you helped David Chen," Don Marconi began without preamble. "This man stole from my family. He took information that cost us millions of dollars and put many good people in prison." Maria tried to keep her voice steady. "I didn't know any of that. I just saw someone who was hurt and tried to help." The old man's dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel like he could see into her soul. "In my world, there are no coincidences. When someone appears in the middle of our business, there is always a reason." He leaned forward slightly, and Maria caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with something that might have been fear from everyone else in the room. David Chen was carrying something when he crashed his car. "Something very important to us. We have searched his apartment, his office, even his girlfriend's house. We cannot find it." Maria's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "I don't know anything about that." Don Marconi smiled, but there was no warmth in it whatsoever. "Of course you don't, but you were the last person to see him before the police and the FBI got involved. You were there when his car was searched by the paramedics and the hospital staff. Perhaps you noticed something that you didn't realize was important at the time." The USB drive in her shoe felt like it was burning a hole through her foot. Maria forced herself to maintain eye contact with the terrifying old man. "I only cared about keeping him alive until the ambulance came. I wasn't looking for anything else." "Strip her down and search her," Don Marconi said matter-of-factly to one of his men. "Check everything twice." Maria's blood turned to ice. If they searched her thoroughly, they would find the USB drive, and she was certain that discovery would mean her death. "Wait," she said desperately. "You don't need to do that. I'm telling you the truth." But Vincent was already nodding to his men, who began moving toward Maria. In that moment of pure terror, she made a decision that surprised even herself. "I lied," she said quickly, causing everyone in the room to freeze. "I did find something." Don Marconi raised one eyebrow, a gesture that somehow conveyed more menace than any threat could have. "Continue." Maria's mind raced as she tried to figure out how to handle this without getting herself killed. "There was something small and black near his car. I thought it might have been his, so I picked it up. But when I saw it was just a computer thing, I threw it in a dumpster behind the hospital." The silence in the room was deafening. Don Marconi stared at her for what felt like an eternity before speaking again. "Show us," he said simply. Vincent looked surprised. "Papa, if she threw it away 3 days ago..." "Show us," the old man repeated, his voice cutting through his son's protest like a knife. Maria realized she had just bought herself time, but possibly at the cost of making her situation even worse. If they went to the hospital and found nothing in the dumpster, they would know she was lying. And she doubted she would get another chance to explain herself. As they prepared to leave the building, Maria caught a glimpse of her reflection in one of the polished surfaces. She looked pale and frightened, which was exactly how she felt, but there was something else in her eyes that she hadn't expected to see: determination. She had stumbled into this nightmare by trying to help someone, and now she was going to have to be smarter and braver than she had ever been in her life if she wanted to survive it. The convoy of black SUVs was waiting outside, engines running, ready to take her to what might be the last destination she would ever visit. The ride to Chicago General Hospital felt like a funeral procession. Maria sat in the middle SUV between two of Don Marconi's men, watching the city pass by through tinted windows. Her mind was working frantically, trying to figure out how she was going to explain why there was nothing in the dumpster she claimed to have thrown the USB drive into. The convoy moved through traffic with an authority that made other drivers quickly get out of the way. Maria realized that this level of organization and power wasn't something that had been built overnight. The Marconi family clearly had resources and connections that reached into every corner of the city. When they arrived at the hospital, Don Marconi's men quickly established a perimeter around the area behind the emergency department, where the dumpsters were located. To any casual observer, it might have looked like a crime scene investigation, which in a way, it was. "Show me exactly where you threw it," Don Marconi commanded, his voice cutting through the morning air. Maria led them to the large dumpster that was closest to where she would have exited the hospital that night. Her heart was pounding as she pointed to it, knowing that her lie was about to be exposed. "It was dark and I was tired. I just tossed it in there without really thinking about it." Vincent signaled to two of his men, who immediately began emptying the contents of the dumpster onto the asphalt. The smell was terrible, and the sight of 3 days' worth of hospital waste being sorted through was nauseating. But Maria was more concerned about the expression on Don Marconi's face, as it became increasingly clear that no USB drive was going to be found. After 20 minutes of thorough searching, Vincent approached his father with a grim expression. "Papa, there's nothing here. Either someone else found it or—" The old man's eyes locked onto Maria with a look that made her feel like a mouse being studied by a particularly intelligent cat. "Or she's lying to us." Maria felt the walls closing in around her. In desperation, she tried one more gambit. "The garbage trucks come every morning. It's been 3 days. Whatever I threw away would be in a landfill by now, mixed with thousands of tons of other trash." For a moment, she thought her explanation might work. Don Marconi seemed to be considering the possibility. But then one of his men whispered something in his ear, and his expression darkened. "Tony just reminded me of something interesting," Don Marconi said slowly. "The hospital's security cameras cover this entire area. If you threw something away here 3 nights ago, there will be a record of it." Maria's blood turned to ice. She hadn't thought about security cameras, and she knew that any footage would show that she had never been near the dumpsters that night. Her lie was about to be exposed in the worst possible way. But before anyone could move toward the hospital's security office, a new sound cut through the morning air. It was the unmistakable noise of multiple helicopters approaching fast. Everyone looked up to see 3 black helicopters with FBI markings descending toward the hospital's helipad. At the same time, black sedans with government plates began converging on their location from multiple directions. Agent Sarah Martinez stepped out of the lead vehicle with a team of heavily armed federal agents behind her. "Nobody move," she shouted through a megaphone. "This is the FBI! Everyone put your hands where we can see them." The next few minutes were chaos. Don Marconi's men reached for their weapons, but they were quickly outnumbered by federal agents who had clearly been planning this operation for some time. Vincent tried to position himself between his father and the advancing FBI agents, but Agent Martinez was focused on something else entirely. "Maria Rodriguez," she called out. "If you're here, identify yourself now." "We're here to help you." Maria was stunned. She raised her hand tentatively. "I'm here." "I'm Maria Rodriguez." Agent Martinez quickly moved toward her, keeping her gun trained on Don Marconi's men. "Ms. Rodriguez, we have reason to believe you're in immediate danger. We need to get you to safety right now." As federal agents moved to surround her, Maria caught sight of Don Marconi's face. The old man was staring at her with an expression of cold calculation. as if he was memorizing every detail of her appearance for future reference. Even with FBI agents surrounding him, he didn't look afraid. He looked like a man who was already planning his next move. "This isn't over," he said quietly to Maria as Agent Martinez led her toward one of the federal vehicles. His voice was barely audible over the commotion, but the threat was unmistakable. Agent Martinez quickly ushered Maria into an armored SUV. "We need to get you out of here immediately," she said. "David Chen told us everything. We've been tracking Marconi's people since yesterday, trying to figure out where they were holding you." As they drove away from the hospital, Maria finally felt safe enough to reach into her shoe and pull out the USB drive. Agent Martinez nearly drove off the road when she saw it. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked. Maria nodded. "I found it in the alley where David crashed. I've been carrying it around for 3 days, scared to death that they would find it." Agent Martinez immediately got on her radio. "This is Martinez. The package has been recovered. Repeat, we have the package." The relief in her voice was unmistakable, but Maria was beginning to understand that her troubles were far from over. Don Marconi had been arrested, but men like him had long memories and longer reaches. And she had just made herself a permanent enemy of one of the most dangerous crime families in America. 6 months later, Maria Rodriguez was living under a new identity in a small town in Oregon, working as a nurse at the local community hospital. The FBI's witness protection program had given her a fresh start, complete with a new name, Sarah Mitchell, and a carefully constructed background that would stand up to casual investigation. The USB drive she had found in that Chicago alley had contained detailed financial records, communication logs, and shipping manifests that documented the Marconi family's extensive money laundering operation. The information had been so comprehensive that it led to the arrest of over 30 members of the organization, including several corrupt city officials and judges who had been on the family's payroll. Don Salvatore Marconi himself had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, though at his age it was essentially a life sentence. Vincent had managed to avoid the most serious charges due to lack of direct evidence, but his family's empire had been severely damaged. Most of their legitimate businesses had been seized by the government, and their criminal operations had been scattered to the winds. David Chen had testified against the family in exchange for his own protection. He was now living somewhere in the witness protection program under his own new identity. Maria had never seen him again after that night in the hospital, but Agent Martinez had told her that he had specifically asked the FBI to make sure she was safe. Maria's new life was quiet and peaceful, exactly the opposite of those terrifying days in Chicago. She had a small apartment near the hospital, a few new friends who knew nothing about her past, and a sense of security that she had never truly appreciated before. But she also knew that she would never again be able to let her guard down completely. Agent Martinez visited her every few months to check on her safety and to update her on any developments in the case. During her most recent visit, she had brought both good news and a warning. The good news is that most of the Marconi organization has been dismantled, Martinez had explained. The old man will die in prison, and Vincent has been reduced to running a small-time gambling operation out of a social club. They don't have the resources they used to have. And the bad news, Maria had asked, though she already suspected what it would be. Vincent has never stopped looking for you. He blames you for destroying his family, and men like him don't forget grudges. We've intercepted communications suggesting that he's hired private investigators to try to track down anyone connected to the case. Maria had nodded, not entirely surprised. She had always known that saving David Chen's life would come with a permanent price, but she also knew that she would make the same choice again. Her nursing training had taught her that every life was worth saving, and she couldn't have walked away from someone in need, regardless of the consequences. One evening, as Maria was finishing her shift at the Oregon hospital, she noticed a familiar black sedan parked across the street. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the type of vehicle that Marconi's men had always driven. But as she watched, a young woman got out of the car, clearly just someone picking up a friend who worked at the hospital. Maria laughed at herself for being paranoid, but the incident reminded her that she would probably spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. The price of doing the right thing sometimes meant living with the consequences forever. As she walked home that night, Maria thought about the path that had led her to this quiet life in Oregon. A simple act of compassion had thrust her into a world of violence and danger that she never could have imagined. but it had also shown her that she was stronger and braver than she had ever known. She still worked as a nurse, still helped people in need, and still believed that most people were fundamentally good. The experience with the Marconi family hadn't changed her core values, but it had taught her to be more careful about the world around her. Agent Martinez had once asked her if she regretted helping David Chen that night. Maria's answer had been immediate and certain. No, I became a nurse to save lives. The fact that saving one life led to all this chaos doesn't change the fact that it was the right thing to do. As Maria reached her apartment building, she noticed that her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was struggling with her groceries. Without hesitation, Maria hurried over to help the elderly woman carry her bags inside. It was a small act of kindness, the type she had performed thousands of times in her life. But as she helped Mrs. Patterson to her door, Maria found herself automatically scanning the street for anything unusual. Some habits, she realized, would probably stay with her forever. She had saved the wrong man that night in Chicago, in the sense that helping him had brought danger into her life. But she had also done exactly what her conscience had demanded of her, and in a strange way that was enough. Maria Rodriguez might be gone forever, but Sarah Mitchell was living a good life, helping people in her new community, and sleeping peacefully at night, knowing that she had helped bring down one of the most dangerous crime families in the country. Sometimes doing the right thing meant accepting that the consequences would follow you forever. But it also meant knowing that you could look at yourself in the mirror every morning without shame. The black SUVs were gone from her life, but the values that had led her to help a stranger in an alley remained as strong as ever.